Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. I'm planting out some more sweet peas. I say some more because I actually started planting sweet peas about a month ago. One, to stagger the harvest so we get some really early flowers, but also because it's a question of finding room for them. And when you're planting them in a border, I like to let the herbaceous plants really appear and get established, apart from anything else, so I know where they are. And then I can put the wigwams up so that I'm not planting sweet peas and then find I've got a big clump of Rebecca or something like that growing up underneath them. The critical thing to get the best from your sweet peas is to remember that they are very greedy, very thirsty, and they don't like heat. So make sure the soil is rich and boost it up with some compost if you've got it, and water them regularly until they get going. And if it's hot and dry, well, that would be lovely. We have a nice hot summer, but remember, sweet peas won't think it's lovely and you will need to water them. Now, coming up on today's programme. Rachel delights in a tulip-filled garden in Gloucestershire.
How many would you say you grow here?
Well, I certainly planted 1,000 last year and probably 800 the year before, so I would hope by next year probably 3,000 tulips at least.
We meet a grower who adores every kind of citrus plant.
You love them and they give you enormous love back in return. It's just a magical experience.
And Joe goes down the pub.
It's like a sort of disco diva, isn't it? It's sort of like sticking out the top as if sort of someone's put their hair up in a top knot or something.
It is utterly bonkers.
But humour, I like a bit of humour. Yeah. And there is a bit of humour in this garden.
And I shall be adding some candelabra primulas to the damp garden. I'm going to run you over, Nelly. Good girl. But here in the jewel garden, it's all about intensity, intense colour, intense growth, drama and excitement. And that's a slow burner. It doesn't really begin till about now when the tulips kick in. But it grows with enormous energy right through till October. And to achieve that end, we found certain plants that we use year in, year out, because they're just perfect for what we're trying to achieve. And many of these are tender. And today I'm going to begin the planting of cannas. But cannas are one of those plants that never fail. Now, the reason why they're so good, I think, is mainly down to the foliage. The lush, rich foliage gives such incredible volume and energy to the garden. Of course, they have wonderful flowers too, but I'd still grow them even if they didn't have flowers. Now, I've marked out where I want the cannas to go with thick canes. If where you live, it's frosty or regularly below 5 degrees, wait. So this is Australia, really big, hugely tall flower. By hugely, I mean 12 foot tall, a real giant. So we'll pop that in there and then I have to imagine how it's going to grow. Behind here, I've got Wyoming, which is one of the best, I think. A really good, rich foliage with these stripes of green. And all the flowers of these cannas exactly fitting with the jewel garden theme with oranges and reds. The critical thing to remember about growing cannas is they like to be wet and they like to be fed a lot. Now, our heavy clay soil with our high rainfall is ideal for cannas. If you garden on chalk or sand, you're going to struggle. And at very least, add lots of compost. And if you've got really free draining soil that doesn't hold moisture, growing them in a pot works very well. So we'll just firm that in, and there we go. Now, what is essential is that these are watered in and watered in well. Give it a really good soak. And what we find is once they're watered in, we never water them again. But cannas in pots need at least a weekly drench. And if it's hot, almost every day. A few weeks ago, Rachel went to Sheepscombe in Gloucestershire to visit a garden that revels in tulips.
If there's one thing I really look forward to in spring, it's a glorious spectacle of tulips erupting from bare soil like floral rainbows. So, when I heard about Celia Hargrave in the heart of Gloucestershire, who's planted her very own tulip festival, I just had to pay a visit to the garden she's nurtured for the last 30 years.
Celia, I think if you ask people to describe their ideal garden setting, it would be this. And it's just idyllic here.
I think so. I mean, I think the situation here sold us the house. And, you know, the landscape here is so beautiful that, for me, you couldn't get a nicer setting.
What really catches your eye are the tulips. Have you always grown them?
No, I would say not really. Probably in the last 3 years particularly. I've realised, I think, more and more just how beautiful they are and what an impact that they can give to the garden at this time of the year.
How many would you say you grow here?
Well, I certainly planted 1,000 last year and probably 800 the year before, so I would hope by next year probably 3,000 tulips at least. I'm always terrified that I won't have enough in the garden. Have I got enough tulips? And mostly I think, no, I haven't. I'll have to go and buy another 50 or another 100.
What are your favourites? You must have some that you just have to put in every year.
Oh, well, Barcelona's a beautiful tulip. Innuendo's a nice sort of staple one in the garden. You could almost say that everyone becomes a favourite because together, it's the impact that they make together, really, rather than just always as an individual.
I shouldn't have asked you. It's like asking about your favourite child, isn't it?
I just love them all, really. And I can't help it.
I know, and you can never have too many.
I'm sold on tulips. I'm sold on tulips.
Well, I agree with you about Barcelona. That's a beautiful tulip. And it's this lovely sort of discovery each year, isn't it? Do you try and put in something that you've not grown before each year?
Oh, definitely.
To try it?
Yes, definitely. I'm hopeless at that. And sometimes I just choose a tulip because I love the name.
Well, why not?
When we first moved here, I was a head teacher in Birmingham, but then circumstances worked against me doing that. And when I stopped teaching, it wasn't that I wished to. In a way, the garden was a saviour to me. And from the very start, when I first started to garden here, the garden has evolved and so have I.
Obviously, as a head teacher, that involves nurturing on a daily basis. Do you think that that's crossed over into the way that you look after this garden?
I think it does in a sense, yes. I think that's very important that you do it if you're teaching. You're there to nurture the children. You're trying to get the best out of them, aren't you? And you're trying to look at them as individuals as well and to make something better for them, really. And in a sense, that's what you do in a garden, isn't it? You're nurturing the plants, you're nurturing the earth, and hopefully, in the end, you're making something that's better, something that's nicer, something that's evolved in that process, really. I love it.
I see a lot of gardens where tulips are used like a bedding plant. Masses and masses of them, all in great big blocks of colour, and they're very impressive and certainly very bright, but I just don't think they have a lot of soul. And here, what I love about what Celia does is that kind of informality. The tulips are just dotted through this planting, they're just sort of popping up here and there, and it's a really lovely effect. And the other thing is that I think she takes into account the plants that are around the tulips. So you've got the emerging leaves of the heuchera, that lovely dark colour picked up on the dark tulip flower. You've got the geraniums and achillea and nice spiky leaves of irises coming through. And the whole thing combined so that rather than just thinking of them in isolation, here it's a holistic approach and it's really beautiful. Now, here's one I recognise from my own garden. It's Flaming Flag, absolutely beautiful. It's from the Triumph group of tulips, which is the largest group, and that beautiful feathering pattern on the petals. It's a stunner. Well, the received wisdom is that in order to have the biggest, boldest display of tulips, you lift them after flowering and replant the following year, which is fine. But actually, in some parts of the garden, you might just want to leave them in, and I do that at home as well. You can see here where Celia's got some of first-year tulips, and they're sort of strong and quite tall, and then some that have been here longer are on shorter stems. The flower shape maybe not quite so good, so possibly they would be in here for a couple of years and then I think they might come out as well. But if you do want to try and make sure that they're as perennial as possible in your garden, then choosing the right variety will help. And the Darwin hybrids are pretty reliable in that sense.
There's a very well-known one called Appledorn, which is scarlet. And this is a relative, Olympic flame, with that wonderful bright red streaking on the edges of the petal.
So if you get the right varieties, the right sort of soil conditions in your garden, and they could well be pretty well perennial. You've clearly put a lot of effort into this garden. What is it giving back to you?
Well, I suppose one thing it does is give me a lot of joy, a lot of happiness, this garden. Being out here is a happy experience, really. And a feeling that somewhere inside me, this was waiting to happen, really, which I didn't know about. So that's quite magical to me that happened.
Well, you're certainly spreading that joy because I really feel it. This is such a beautiful garden to be in. Thank you so much for sharing it. I've loved coming here.
Well, we're very lucky, and I think every day, really, we're very lucky to be here.
I didn't plant any tulips here in the dry garden last year because I knew I was going to revamp it, and it would have meant digging them up just at the moment when they were coming into their best. But actually, this is a really good place for tulips because it's dry, because it drains so well. And Celia's garden is on limestone. And limestone or chalk drains really well, and that is the key to success with tulips. And by the way, I'm surrounded by mason bees that love this particular wall, and they're really busy and have been for the last few weeks. And this little patch of honesty growing here in the corner, which is such a delight, has been reappearing every year for the last 20, 25 years. I absolutely love it. And I've sown seed and I've collected seed and I've tried to grow it elsewhere right across the garden with nothing like the same success as this little self-sown patch. And it goes back to the old thing, if you find the right place for a plant, then it will be happy. Now, it's time to visit the first of your gardens, which takes us all the way to Japan.
Hello, my name is Yasu. Welcome to Petit English Garden in Itoshima, Japan. A friend of mine who lives in UK loves bluebells and has told me how beautiful they are all over the forest floor. I've always wanted to visit UK in spring, but I've never had a chance. So I decided to grow a group of bluebells in my garden. However, some of the bulbs didn't grow well and disappeared. So every year I propagate bulbs in planters in order to replace the dead ones. I select the larger bulbs from the planter and plant them in plastic pots. Then plant the remaining smaller bulbs in the planter again. It's mid-April and the bluebells are all in bloom. The carpet of blue flowers in lovely shapes is truly beautiful and inspiring. I hope to increase the number of flowers much more. Thank you.
I love the attention to detail and the care with which Yasso propagated his bluebells. But if you're thinking of doing the same in your garden, and bluebells are wonderful, do make sure that you do it with English bluebells and not Spanish, because the English bluebell, which hangs just down on one side, and we think of as a carpet in woodland, is not too invasive. Whereas the Spanish bluebell, which hangs on both sides and is bigger and generally more robust, is truly, truly invasive. And once you get that into a border, it's very difficult to get it out. This is always one of the markers of spring, because now is the time to bring out citrus that you've been overwintering in a greenhouse or a conservatory or a shed. Now, all citrus plants, whether it's a small ornamental one that's effectively a house plant or a great big one like this, should be treated the same way, just bearing in mind though that many have different levels of hardiness. Limes, for example, are very tender, whereas a lemon like this is actually quite robust. And it's certainly a good place to start if you've never grown them before. What I want to do first is put this onto chocks. When you bring them outside, you're going to have to water them fairly regularly, but it's really important that they don't sit in water. Right. By putting them up on blocks, it means the water goes through the plant and runs away. So we've got fantastic blossom growing here, and that will obviously bear the fruit. And as a rule, if you think the fruit are ripe, particularly at this time of year, pick them, because they will inhibit the development of flowers and new fruits, so that the more you pick, the more they will produce. A lot of people say, well, how do you know when it's ripe? If it looks a lemony colour to you, and it will come away in your hand, which that has, then it's ripe. Now, it's a good idea not to prune until new growth is good and established. And what I do is I bring them outside and then I leave them for a couple of weeks, let them acclimatise, and you'll see plenty of new shoots, and that's when to prune, and I'll do that with you in 2 or 3 weeks' time. But what I do, as soon as I put the citrus outside, is give them a good feed. And the first part of that is a liquid feed. This is simply liquid seaweed, and it's going to have a feed and a drink, and I will go on until it's running out the bottom. Now, the reason I'm using a liquid seaweed is because it is high on potassium, and that will feed the roots and the flowers rather than the leaves. And tomato feed will do the job just as well. So we'll give this one a drink too. And I repeat that once a week from now through till September. Now that's stage 1 of the feeding. Stage 2, at this time of year, is to top dress them. And I'm using homemade compost. If you haven't got any, fish blood and bone will do just as well. But I like compost for 2 reasons. One, because there's a lot of bacterial and fungal activity, which builds up a good relationship with the roots. And 2, it acts as a good mulch. So I just spread that round, move it away from the trunk, There we go. Right, these should be set up, and I just hope that we don't have any late frost, but I will have some fleece to hand and I can just wrap them up, and that will be protection enough. Now, I love these oranges and lemons that I've gathered over the years. This one, for example, was given to me as a cutting 37 years ago. But my own feelings are pretty pale and wan compared to the passion that Dr. Shanaz Kamachi has for her collection of citrus plants.
I can't get enough of citrus plants. They're just absolutely magnificent plants to grow. I think I last counted about 34 in my collection. The reason why I love growing citrus is because they are evergreen trees and plants, and they produce highly aromatic leaves to your gorgeous blossoms and your highly fragrant flowers. You can actually have fruits hanging on the tree 12 months of the year. My name is Shanaz. I'm a GP from North London. My love for gardening started when I was about 4 or 5 years old. I was born in Bangladesh, so I used to love visiting my nan's courtyard garden because it was filled and packed with all the tropical fruits and plants that you could ever imagine. And she used to have huge lime trees. From Bangladesh, I moved on to Dubai, and I used to do a lot of gardening with my mum. She used to have all these cuttings that she used to acquire from the roadsides and, other gardens. And she had a little collection of plants in the balcony, so I learned a lot from her. This is a grapefruit tree I have here. This one particularly is called the Star Ruby grapefruit tree, which is slightly smaller than your average grapefruits. And the fragrance is intoxicating because the fragrance from the conservatory, it actually just wafts right into the house. So I absolutely love them. Pomelos is actually my top citrus because of the massive fruits you get and also the massive flowers. Gorgeous. I'm looking forward to some yummy, delicious grapefruits later on in the year. So being a GP, I do prescribe a lot of gardening to my patients, and it's been more so over the last 2 years because of the rise of mental health illnesses. I mean, I personally suffer from a lot of stress and anxiety, and I have found plants, although being my obsession, it is my outlet where it kind of helps me focus, stay calm. It feeds your mind, your body, and your soul. So this is the variegated pink lemon tree. Absolutely beautiful tree. And this is your little tiny pea-sized baby fruit. And then this will eventually become about that big, so about golf ball size. It's called a pink lemon because the flesh inside is actually a pinky color. This has to be one of the most favorite lemons out of all my lemon trees in my collection. If I wish I could hug it, I would. Now, it's very important not to underwater and not to overwater citrus. If you don't get the watering just right, it could lead to the citrus plants being shocked. And just like human beings, when we get shocked and stressed, then we kind of have a breakdown. So that's what happens with citrus plants and trees. They end up dropping their leaves, or they look very, very sick and miserable. I do use a moisture meter. Well, I have to admit, a moisture meter I think is my gardening best friend because it takes away a lot of the guesswork when I'm watering. This one here is called the strawberry orange. So the reason why it's called strawberry orange is because it's got like a hint of strawberry and raspberry flavor. So it's not your typical orange. The beauty of citrus is that you will get buds, blossoms and fruit on the same plant or the tree throughout the year. So there is always interest in the plant or tree. This is why I just love citrus. This is the standard orange tree, which is called Citrus sinensis. As you can see, this is quite a tall tree. So I had loads and loads of blossoms and I had only one fruit. So that's the thing with citrus trees. Not all the blossoms are going to end up into fruit. And that's basically Mother Nature's way of, you know, making sure the tree doesn't get exhausted. The second key point in growing citrus is light. Now, they love lots and lots of light. If you can get about 6 hours of sunlight, that will really help in setting your buds and blossoms and fruit. The third key pointer would be your humidity. Now, they don't like bone dry air. Misting is very important, so it's highly essential that if you're growing them indoors, make sure you mist them daily so that you're giving that little bit of moisture in the air. That's a baby Rangpur lime. And they're absolutely beautiful, gorgeous tree. This tree originated from India, so it was actually a natural cross between a lemon and a mandarin. It's not really a true lime because, as you can see, this has that mandarin color and the flavor is on a sweeter side than on a lime side. It's very important that you provide them with cool winters because citrus plants and trees, like other plants and trees, they like dormancy, and that kind of helps with maturation of the fruit as well. And they love hot summers, so you can actually throw them out in the garden or your balcony for the summer. This is my other grapefruit. So this is your pomelo. All grapefruits, they are resulted from a cross between a pomelo, which is the largest citrus in the citrus family, and also your orange. So I've had 3 fruits which are ready to harvest because they're a little bit squidgy when I'm pressing on them. And again, as with all grapefruits, the blossoms are huge, the flowers are really big, highly fragrant, and they're absolutely intoxicating. So I can't wait to have this for salad later on. I really love this. And it's absolutely gorgeous fragrance of this fruit. Oh, you can't get enough of them, can you? I just can't see anything not to love about citrus. A harvest that I get at the end. You love them and they give you enormous love back in return. It's just a magical experience.
Well, if you've never grown citrus before, that should certainly inspire you, and do give it a go. They're really rewarding, and even the tiny little citrus plants that you can buy essentially as houseplants have fruits which I am reliably informed are especially good when added to a gin and tonic. You may remember in the first programme, beginning of March, I sowed some perennial seeds and asked if you wanted to sow them along with me and we'd take that journey together. Well, I'm going to show you where I've got to with mine. You can see here we've got Rebecca Goldstone. The seedlings are very small. At the same time, I did sow some Aquilegias and they are a little bit bigger. So don't worry if A, your seedlings are very small, or B, even that they haven't appeared yet. It may not be the end of the road for them. They could be just very slow. And this is a slow game. We're growing plants that we want to be big enough to pot on by the end of the summer and then wait till next spring before planting them out into the garden. And if you have a seed tray with perennial seedlings but it seems to be empty, before you throw them away, put them in a polythene bag and put that into the coldest part of the fridge or even a freezer. And give them a blast of cold for a week or two, and that may well trigger germination. If after that Nothing happens, well, okay, maybe they're not going to work, but persevere for a bit longer. Now, still to come on today's programme. Joe went to Ticehurst in East Sussex last summer to celebrate a unique pub garden.
It's an incredibly sociable space here around the fire pit. And with the planting, I love the way it tears up.
I didn't want to put hedges up or, block light too much. And then there are the issues of trying to dissuade people from clambering through the flower beds.
But first, we meet an allotmenteer whose job takes him away for weeks on end. Nevertheless, he manages to keep his plot not just looking good, but being highly productive too.
I think gardening is all about experimentation because it's impossible to have perfect results with everything. You can almost always find a way of making something better. And there's always something that you haven't quite mastered that you want to keep persevering with until you get it just right and you just nail it. And that's quite satisfying when you've done that. My name's Annika, and this is my allotment in the heart of Bristol. So I've been on this site now for 4 years. Quite fortunate here, really. It's right in the city of Bristol, and yet it's a green oasis full of wildlife. I live in a flat, so having that outdoor space like this is quite an asset. It is my haven here. So I work as a vet, and about 10 years ago I started working in the UK overseas territories quite a bit, like the Falkland Islands, Tristan da Cunha, Pitcairn. It means I'm often away for a month or two at a time. It's meant I've had to try and set my allotment up to automate itself. So I'm always looking for new gadgets and accessories to automate my systems and try and help my plants go further. So this is my greenhouse. I've got a few accessories in here that helped automate it and help to keep it self-sustaining when I'm not present. One is this. It's a hydraulic rod that basically automatically opens the window when it heats up. And then when it cools down, it closes it by itself. Saves the need to have to manually open and close the window. I've also got wicking pots and system in here. So there's planters with a reservoir at the bottom, which has feed and water in it. That wicks up via capillary matting to the plants, so they can just use water as they need it. It'll sustain them for about 2 weeks. The results are phenomenal. Chilies especially seem to like just having the right level of water, not getting too wet or too dry. I don't actually eat a lot of chilies, I tend to give most of them away, but it's not about the eating, it's about the growing. The last thing I've added this year, which is a new treat to myself, is a solar-powered hydroponic system. It's what professionals use, so I don't think I would have the whole allotment on a hydroponic because that's a farm basically. But I saw the kit and it's pretty cool. I had to try it out because, it's something different. I'm always looking for new ideas, new methods, new tricks to try and push my plants to the next level, try and get better results. I don't like to just grow something so the plant grows and produces a crop. I like to get that thrill of having a bountiful harvest. So, a plant or a tree is so laden in fruit it can barely take its weight. That's the allotment dream. One issue that I was having with my sweet corn was that birds and rats would get to the cobs quite soon before they were ripe, and I have a simple solution for that, to just put old socks over them to protect them, and it works brilliantly. I've not lost a single one this year. So this is my root veg bed. I've always found it quite hard to get good results with things like carrots and parsnips. To get a straight, thick root with no pest damage is actually quite difficult. So I built this about 3 years ago. It's a higher bed than my others. It's about 1.5 feet high, and it's filled with sieved soil, and I'm primarily growing carrots and parsnips in this bed. So they go in about May time, and now in September they're ready to harvest. The results pretty much speak for themselves. I keep a computer record of everything I do here. Just write a few lines about what I've done on a particular day, what I've sown, what I've planted, what I've harvested, just so I can refer back to it in the future and see when I did something. I know it sounds almost a bit like an obsession, but I couldn't manage without it now. I think I'm just a bit of a fussbot, to be honest. I'm a bit of a perfectionist, which has its downsides. Me just spend 5 hours trying to prune one tree perfectly, then I have time to do the other 10. It's exciting to have something that just makes you stop and think, you know, what is that? Something that's a bit out of the ordinary, something that you just don't expect to see in Bristol. And for me, it's melons. I prepare the soil quite well, give them enough space to spread. I also put tiles underneath them just to protect the fruit from imprinting and damage from soil and stones. They are my allotment VIPs. I look after them as well as possible. I had limited success this year, but I'm hoping to get them out earlier next year and hopefully smash it. I don't tend to do things by half measures. It's got to be all or nothing, really. There's something about having an allotment that gives me a sense of freedom. I've got a blank canvas here where I can experiment. It is an infinite hobby. There's always something new to try. There's always some new crop to try, some new variety, some new fad that's coming up. I don't really like to just stagnate. I like to sort of keep going and keep trying something new. Just push the boundaries a bit further, just to see what you can get away with.
Aniket's enthusiasm and energy and skill are really impressive, but as I was watching that, I was thinking, God, how different I am in my approach to his, not least for the fact that for me, the eating is just as important as the growing. It's a continuum. There's no point at which I can separate the two. Now, what I'm coming to now is growing summer lettuce. We eat a lot of lettuce in the Don household, and I try and eat it every single day of the year fresh from the garden. Now, to do that, I have to use different varieties that will adapt to different conditions and different times of year. These are high summer lettuce. What I've got are two types of cos. There's Lovejoy's cos and Paris Island. Very well-known varieties and really adapted to summer growing because they grow fast, they grow big. They don't bolt too fast, but they will if they get too hot and too dry. Lettuce, by the way, are a very good crop to grow if you have rather a shady veg patch. Whatever variety of lettuce you're growing and whatever time of year, the technique is much the same. Now, of course, you can sow direct, and at this time of year, that's perfectly good. The soil will be warm and they will germinate. But I prefer to grow lettuce in seed trays, prick them out, put them into plugs and grow them on. The first thing you need to bear in mind is do not sow too thickly. I don't know how many tens of thousands of seeds of these I've sown, but I have to say I don't get bored of the repetition and certainly don't get bored of the eating of them. And these will be ready to harvest if I sow them now, the end of June. Just sprinkle it thinly on the seed tray. A packet of seed like this will do at least 2 sowings. It's far better to sow little and often. I'm just going to press it down very lightly to ensure really good contact between the seed and the potting compost. And by the way, this is just a standard peat-free, coir-based potting compost. And then cover them over lightly. You can use vermiculite, you can sieve if you want, but actually just a very thin scattering will do fine. And if you're sowing direct, you just tease the soil back over the drill you've put them in. So we'll just label it. And the best way to water them initially is to put them in a basin or a tray of water so that the compost absorbs it like a sponge. If you water directly onto it, unless you're very careful, there's a real risk of the very small seeds being pushed by the force of the water to the side of the seed tray. So I'm just going to pop these into the tray over here. I'll leave those to soak for about half an hour and then put them somewhere warm. It doesn't need a heated mat, it doesn't even need a greenhouse. A windowsill will do fine. I wouldn't put them on a south-facing one because it can get too hot, particularly when the seedlings emerge. Keep them moist and they will germinate in about 4 or 5 days and be ready to prick out in about 2 weeks and plant out in about 5 weeks. These lettuce are ones that I sowed in February, so they grew very slowly, much more slowly than these summer ones will, but they're ready to plant out and I'm going to do that very shortly. But first, we're going to visit another of your gardens. It belongs to Graham Wallace in Romford, in Essex.
Hello, my name's Graham. My wife Denise and I have this modest suburban garden. And one of the crops that we've been growing in recent years is something called flower sprouts, which are like a cross between kale and Brussels sprouts. I love them, but then I love all the brassicas. Anyway, this year I was a bit late pulling them up after they'd finished cropping, but I noticed they were starting to come into bloom, so I thought I'll leave them be and see what transpires. And I'm glad I did, because the bright yellow flowers turn out to be veritable bee magnets. The bees drawn to this riot of yellow appear to be almost exclusively one species, the hairy-footed flower bee, a species which I only learnt to identify this year after I photographed one visiting the blossom of our little cherry tree. As well as the flower bees, these blooms also attract the occasional bumblebee and hoverfly. I've not seen any honeybees on here though, but then even though I love all the brassicas, I'm not quite sure how I'd feel about sprout-flavoured honey. Besides the flower sprouts, there's plenty more colour on show in our garden at the moment. Heuchera red bells, small flowers, and I love the colour contrast between the deep yellow of these little poppies and the soft blue of the forget-me-nots. So it turns out that being a bit late pulling up the flower sprouts wasn't such a bad thing. Gave us all something a little extra to enjoy.
Well, I've shared Graham's experience of seeing how the bees love all brassica flowers. They just devour them. Now, this area here, which we sort of use to put pots where we don't quite know where to plant them or as a holding bay, but I'm going to change that. And over the next few weeks, I'm going to develop it into a space devoted exclusively to growing vegetables in containers. And there will be 2 goals. One is to show how many different veg you can grow in pots, and also to show which ones are best to grow. And at the end of the season, I think we'll have a really rich harvest just out of containers. And anyway, the process will be good fun. Now, this bed is for lettuces that we sowed in February. And this is a variety called All the Year Round. It can resist much more cold than the cos lettuce that I've just been sowing. And so if you sow these in February, they're ready to plant out any time from the end of March. But by growing them in plugs, you can really control some key points. The first and most important, and the reason why I grow so little with direct sowing, is because at this time of year, direct sown lettuce in particular are very vulnerable to slugs and snails. The other great advantage of growing in plugs is that you can space them as wide or as close as you like. And that saves on seed, it saves on thinning. It also gives each individual lettuce the chance of maximising the available nutrients. And that pursuit of perfection, even in the humble lettuce, is for me one of the great pleasures of gardening. Okay, so we'll start, and I'm going to plant these in a grid. It goes without saying that with a raised bed, I'm not going to tread on this at all. I'm going to work round, but you do need straight lines. And the reason for that is for hoeing. To keep them weed free, you need to be able to get a hoe in between them. That spacing is right to give a decent sized lettuce. With lettuce, you have to water. They grow much better if they're kept pretty moist. So if it doesn't rain, I will water these at least once a week. I would expect to start harvesting these in about 2 to 3 weeks' time. And the key to having a good supply of lettuce is succession. As a good rule of thumb, when you clear a crop, sow some more seeds. Now, last September, Joe went to the pub in Ticehurst in East Sussex. And while he was there, he thought he'd have a look at the garden.
Ever since its Tudor beginnings, when it charged a penny a bed for the use of a plate, linen and food, the Bell at Ticehurst has been providing board and lodging. The pub is still very much the centre of the community, but the garden needed a major overhaul. So the owner called time and asked garden designer Joe Thompson to drag the space into the 21st century. So what was here before, and how did you go about designing it?
There was very little here before because the pub had just been renovated. So this was just a pile of rubble on 2 levels. And as you know, levels in gardens are really important. Change of levels, change of height. That makes interest as you walk around a garden. So I was trying to create little areas and bigger areas at the same time.
No, it's an incredibly sociable space here around the fire pit. I love the materials that you've used as well, you know, these railway sleepers that sort of, you know, bleached out.
Well, that is what I wanted to use, these warm textures, everything feeling quite cosy and welcoming, nothing that felt too stark or something you're worrying about sitting on. You know, I wanted you to feel like you just come and sit down, sort of flake out and just enjoy the place.
With the planting, I love the way it tears up. You know, you've created privacy and interest. What was the rationale behind the planting?
Well, there were some really practical considerations, like giving all of these little guest lodges privacy. And I didn't want to put hedges up or, you know, block light too much. And then there are the issues of trying to dissuade people from clambering through the flower beds because there are some little drops.
People or children?
It can be both, you never know, depending on how good that party is. So we've got, there are things like there are hazels, the grasses which catch the light, and then you've got the lower layers of the perennials. So it's a bit like the garden, the planting has got these layers too. So we go for a bit of a walk.
A strollette, nice.
Yeah, a little wander through the garden here. And you can see, as we come down here, there are quite big, wide beds. And so the roses give it a bit of structure and this fabulous kind of interest through the seasons.
Yeah.
They're really good.
Oh, yeah, I mean, the hips are just, what an amazing range of colour just on Rosa rugosa and flowers as well at the same time.
It's wonderful. It's kind of double bubble. It's fab.
Yeah, it's beautiful. This planting is great too.
And it's really low maintenance. So you've got all the, you know, things like the nepeta and the geraniums that you just cut back when they're finished with.
You love your dahlias, don't you?
I love them. I love that seasonal colour, that kind of, you can be as tasteful or as bonkers as you like in your colour combinations.
The Trachycarpus on the top of the roof. Now, tell me about that one.
Well, I was absolutely adamant that that would not work. And 7 years later, here they still are.
It's like a sort of disco diva, isn't it? It's sort of like sticking out the top as if sort of someone's put their hair up in a top knot or something.
It is utterly bonkers.
But humour, I like a bit of humour.
Yeah.
And there is a bit of humour in this garden. And that lightness of touch has been woven right through the garden. Its curved paths and towering beds makes you feel there's a delightful surprise waiting round every corner. I can imagine being a kid running around looking into these gabions. And these, of course, with my landscape hat on, are a practical solution. They're just wire baskets. You can fill them with rocks or old bottles from the pub or logs or whatever. And they're fantastic for wildlife as well, because they're little nooks and crannies that beetles can get into and insects can overwinter in as well. The garden is a little like a larder, bursting with goodies. There's an edible hedge, fruit trees, and plenty of herbs. Joe has brought shrubs and trees right up to the back door of the pub. This is such a lovely spot under these mulberry trees. They create dappled shade beneath. It's just what you need. But it's also a clever bit of planting as well, because in the summer, when you need them, they're in leaf, and then in winter, you know, when the leaves all drop, they let the light come through when the light levels are low, so they're perfect. And over there, the screening between this part of the garden and the other part is arbutus. It's an evergreen multi-stem shrub used as a hedge. So we've got evergreens and deciduous plants all being used in a really clever way. The thing is, when you normally go into a pub garden, it's usually lawn and places to sit. But here, it's more garden than pub, which is great. But it's still a pub. Cheers.
I really like the way that the garden was completely focused around how people use a pub, and still there was lovely planting. Hugely successful. Now, the changes I'm making and have made here in the damp garden actually were instigated really by one plant, and that was the candelabra primula. I did plant them in here before, and for a year or so they looked great, and this is their natural environment. They love damp shade. But the hostas and the commassias grew too big, and the competition was too fierce. And although they like shade, they were actually shaded out. They just simply got no light and disappeared. So I've changed things around, created a space where I can plant them. And if you're not familiar with candelabra primulas, they are obviously part of the primula family. Most of them come from China or the Himalayas around Tibet and North India. And they grow in these incredible tiers or whorls of flower. So you can have bright oranges, yellows, pinks, really dramatic flowers in late spring and early summer. I'm going to start with Primula beesiana. And this grows to about 18 inches tall with sort of pinky purple flowers. Now, these are small plants at the moment. They take about 3 years to reach full maturity, so you have to be quite patient. Now those, as I say, are a kind of mauvey pink. But on this side, I've got a really good orangey yellow, which is Primula bulliana. Now this is semi-evergreen, which tends to mean that if you live in a mildish area, they will stay evergreen. But in this garden, we do sometimes get some really cold weather, in which case they will lose their leaves, but they'll grow back. And I can put these in here for the moment. What I will do is, before planting them, I'm going to soak them. These are plants that are happiest when they're really wet. It doesn't matter how much you water the soil. If the compost itself is very dry, very often it doesn't absorb. So by soaking them first, that means they get off to a good start. I've added lots of compost as a mulch that's worked in. So this is really water retentive soil. So we have Primula bulliana on this side and beesiana on that. But I've got another type that I'm going to put back in the new bog bed that I've made that is a real whopper. This is Primula prolifera, and it will grow when fully mature up to 1 metre tall, with these tiers of brilliant yellow flower in May and June. And because it's tall, I will place it and plant it in amongst the other plants. This is a thalictrum, and so I can have that coming up through there, and then maybe some at the front. But I'm happy with the way this is looking. In fact, I'm more than happy. I'm very excited with the changes here to the damp garden, because there's no doubt about it. I think it already looks much better, and in a month or so, it's going to look spectacular. Right, I'm going to give these a soak and then get them in the ground. And here are some jobs for you this weekend. Basil is a herb that relishes as much heat and goodness as you can give it. As a rule, if tomatoes are happy, then so is basil. Sow it now and grow the seedlings on, and it should be ready to plant out into a greenhouse or a warm spot in the garden round about the middle of June. Now the weather is warming up, so is the soil, and the weeds can become rampant. So it's a good idea to keep on top of them. If you're growing anything in rows or a grid, be they vegetables or flowers, a hoe is the best solution. Try and do it on a dry day when the weeds aren't too big, and before they set seed. Gently slice through just under the soil, and leave them to dry, and you can gather them up and safely add them to the compost heap. All clematis are growing very fast now, but particularly the late flowering group 3 kinds, and they do need support. So tie them up regularly over the next few weeks. And then, round about the beginning of June, they develop sufficient tendrils to become self-supporting. I planted these 4 crab apples. They're a variety called Everest. I think it was 4 years ago now. For the first couple of years, they were a little bit tentative, I think is the right word. But now they are magnificent. I think this is peak blossom. There's always a moment in the garden when the blossom is at its blossomest. And of course, the great thing about now is that the garden is growing into glory for weeks to come. And it's just thrilling. However, no more for today. I'm afraid we've run out of time. Don't forget that this weekend is a bank holiday weekend, so use it. Get out into the garden for as much as you can. And next week, we shall be coming from the RHS Malvern Spring Festival. And the week after that, we have a programme dedicated to houseplants in every aspect. And I'll see you back here at Longmeadow in 3 weeks' time. So until then, bye-bye.